I only speak a tiny bit of Portuguese. Duolingo tells me I'm 30% fluent. This is a lie. So this talk will be in English. I'm Michael Ossmann. Hi. And I'm giving the morning keynote here. Somehow I managed to make it here alive and awake. And some of you did too. That's great. Thanks for coming. I'm the founder of Great Scott Gadgets, an open source hardware company that makes tools for the information security community. Before starting Great Scott Gadgets, my background was in information security and in particular wireless communication security research. I'm a hacker. I'm also the designer of HackRF1, an open source hardware platform for software-defined radio. Basically, it's a test instrument that can transmit or receive arbitrary radio signals. I started the HackRF project because I wanted a better tool for wireless communication security research and education. But the thing that I've enjoyed the most about the HackRF project, however, has been seeing people use HackRF1 for things, diverse applications that I never imagined. It turns out that low-cost, uncalibrated test equipment is useful for a lot of different things. I've seen HackRF1 used in physics research. I've seen it used in biological research. I've seen it used to cheat at video games by spoofing GPS signals. And of course, I've seen it used for things like hijacking simultaneous translation systems in conferences like this. I frequently speak at security conferences around the world, and I recently had the opportunity to speak at an experimental physics conference. It was very interesting, getting to know, all those scientists and their work, and to see how excited they were to share their work with one another. The opportunity to address that audience got me thinking about similarities and differences between the scientific community and the hacker community, and the ways that we share ideas. I wrote this talk for both audiences. Raise your hand if you're an inventor. A couple hands are up. Maybe you've created some software or some hardware. Maybe you've invented something in your head, but you haven't actually produced it yet. It could be mechanical or electronic or visual or even virtual. It doesn't matter. It could be large or small. It's just something that didn't exist before or is in some way better than things that existed before it. Anyone? More hands. Cool. How many of you didn't raise your hand at first because you don't think your creation qualified as an invention? Or because you don't fit your own preconceived image of an inventor. When I was a child, people often asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I usually answered an electrical engineer or an inventor, and somehow it has turned out that I am now both of those things, more or less, though I took a circuitous path to get here. I didn't study engineering or anything technical in school. I didn't pursue a career in the creation of technology. I did not learn how to design electronics until I wanted to build tools in order to accomplish other things. When I was young, I had a distinct image in my head of what an inventor was. And recently, I've tried to recall how this image may have been formed. What role models created this impression? Edison? Frankenstein? Dr. Bunsen Honeydew? In school, I learned that Edison invented the light bulb, Bell invented the telephone, Ford invented the automobile, Marconi invented the radio, and the Wright brothers invented the airplane. I've since learned that none of these things is true exactly. A century from now, I honestly expect that school children will learn that Gates or Jobs invented the computer. For a wonderful case study, I recommend Bruce Boy's presentation at the 2015 Open Hardware Summit entitled, "What the Wright Brothers Can Teach Us About Open Source versus Closed Source." Bruce presented compelling evidence that challenged what I learned in school about the invention of powered flight, even showing how Orville and Wilbur Wright, through a series of questionable legal actions, actually harmed the progress of aviation more than they helped it. Bruce argued convincingly that the Wright brothers set back the aviation industry in the United States 20 years behind other countries. The Wright brothers had a patent, which they interpreted very broadly, claiming that it covered all manned-powered flight, when in fact the text of the patent was more specific. They were relentless in their pursuit of outrageously high licensing fees from fellow aviation pioneers. At the start of the Great War, the United States only had a few airplanes, while European countries had thousands. There were many inventors of flight around the world, all of them learning from each other and making incremental advances. The Wikipedia article on the history of flight mentions many of these, but repeatedly cites the Smithsonian Institution's assertion that the Wright brothers were first in flight. What the Wikipedia article does not mention is that after Orville Wright's death, the executors of his estate sold the original Wright Flyer to the Smithsonian for $1 under a contract that stipulated that the Smithsonian would never make any statement or public display suggesting the capability of manned-powered flight before the Wright brothers' successful flight in 1903. I learned in school in the United States that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, an achievement credited in large part for setting the stage for the Industrial Revolution. Overlooked was the fact that the device more directly resulted in a large increase in slavery in the United States. I also learned that someone else invented the cotton gin independently, and that Whitney's patent was later disputed. Now, this was described to me as a shocking coincidence. Surely the probability of such simultaneous invention is minuscule, because it violates our mythology of invention. In our mythology, the inventor is a man, which is stupid. The inventor works alone, which is stupid. Sometimes the inventor has one assistant, but the assistant is not acknowledged as a contributor, which is stupid. The inventor spends a tremendous amount of time in his laboratory or workshop, which is the one part of the mythology that is probably correct. Yet it disagrees with the greatest myth of all, that the invention is the result of a single transcendent moment of inspiration. Eureka! The Eureka moment is the core of the mythology of invention. Breakthroughs arrive supposedly not by climbing one step at a time, but by leaping to a great height all at once. The capacity to achieve such acts of genius is what separates inventors from us mortals. It is why I think most of us hesitate to call ourselves inventors. We don't want to be seen as arrogant, self-proclaimed geniuses, or worse, as crackpot practitioners of pseudoscience or chasers of the next big consumer craze. We don't want our creations compared to the light bulb. Neither do we want them compared to the jump to conclusions mat. I don't know why the Eureka myth is so powerful. It seems to be something we want to believe, despite all evidence. And it extends beyond inventors to all sorts of creative people. Mozart, it is said, held in his head the entire Jupiter Symphony, his longest, in a single moment. Think about that, a single moment. Bullshit. The Eureka Myth, by the way, is the title of a book by Jessica Silby, As I developed the ideas for this talk, I started calling the whole mythology of invention the Eureka Myth. Eventually, I looked it up to see if anyone else had used the phrase before. It turned out to have been independently discovered, more than once. Most notably, as the title of Silby's book, that presents evidence challenging the mythology of invention. Simultaneous invention, or multiple discovery, is in fact the normal way that inventions happen, not the rare exception I thought as a child. If you take the time to investigate the origin of almost any technological breakthrough in history, you'll find that the mythology does not agree with reality. Progress is made in small steps by many people, not in great leaps by a solitary genius. Eli Whitney was involved in patent disputes, not only with one person, but several. Some were independent discoverers of similar technology. Others made incremental improvements to Whitney's cotton gin, which was itself an incremental improvement of existing technology. If you were somehow able to go back in time and identify all the independent inventors of the cotton gin, you would probably end up with a long list of names. And it is possible that Eli Whitney would not be among them. It is moderately likely that he took the idea from a woman he knew or a black slave he owned. But women and slaves weren't granted patents in those days. Now, when I was young, I dreamed of one day holding my own patents. I hoped that I could be one of those special people with the gift of inventive inspiration, that my eurekas would somehow make the world a better place. I did not realize at the time how absurd the patent system is. Patents confer a government-granted monopoly to the single genius creator of a great new technology. The system makes sense, however, only if you believe the mythology of invention. The supposed benefits to society are that patents incentivize invention and that they result in the publication of ideas that would otherwise be kept secret. Now, the publication benefit is easily refuted. It is common in the technological industries, at least in the United States, for commercial engineers to be advised not to read patents for fear of accusations of willful infringement. I do not read patents. If the creators of new technology actively avoid reading the patents of other creators, then their publication can only have a negative effect on progress, not a positive one. If you choose not to read patents, you won't miss much. Technology is pretty easy to reverse engineer. Like, we all took things apart when we were kids to see how they worked, right? It's literally child's play. The other benefit of patents, that they incentivize invention, is easier to believe. Our mythology tells us that invention is a rare occurrence, that inventors are special people without whom we would languish in a dark age. The reality, of course, is that invention is a normal thing that humans do every day. Ask yourself why you invent things, small or large. If the people sitting next to you raised their hand earlier, ask them later today, what motivates their creativity? I bet you'll hear things like, I enjoy being creative. I like finding better ways to do things. I try to give back to those who create technology that I use, or it makes my job easier. I bet you won't hear people say, I patent my inventions and that's how I got rich. There are a lot of people these days talking about patent reform. They usually point to software patents or business process patents, and they propose reducing the reach of the patent system in some way. I do not support patent reform. Patents are harmful to society, in my opinion, and they should be abolished. Now, the harm caused by patents is easy to see. By restricting new technologies to just one producer, they slow the adoption of technology and make it harder for others to make incremental improvements. The only justification for the patent system is that it produces more benefit than harm. But the benefits only appear to exist if you believe in the mythology of invention. Around the turn of the century, I had an idea that might have been patentable. I had recently moved to the mountains of Colorado, and driving on a windy road one dark night in my mountain town, I nearly hit a deer that was standing right in the middle of the road. Now, I didn't see it at first because it was standing just past a fairly tight turn, just to the left of my headlights until I had completed the turn. Now, fortunately, I was able to stop quickly enough to avoid a collision, but the moment of fright got me thinking. Why were my headlights pointed the direction my car was facing, not the direction my car was turning? Wouldn't it make more sense to have headlights that swivel from side to side as the steering wheel turned? Now, I thought my idea from that moment of inspiration was pretty good, and I thought that instead of messing with my existing headlights, maybe I could experiment with a third headlight mounted on the car. I never did retrofit my car with an experimental headlight, but a year or two later, I saw an advertisement from Lexus touting the exact same feature. Now, what if I had already applied for a patent for the idea? Or what if I had started a company to develop it, holding the idea as a trade secret? Would I have been justified in assuming that Lexus had stolen my idea? Would I have felt compelled to sue? As it happened, I don't think I ever told anyone about the idea, so I easily concluded that it was independently invented by someone else. Now, my idea may have been good, but it was not unique. Over the past few years, several automakers, including BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, and Volvo, have been sued by Adaptive Headlamp Technologies Incorporated for infringement of a 2007 patent for headlights that swivel as a steering wheel is turned. Adaptive Headlamp Technologies Incorporated is a subsidiary of an intellectual property licensing company, which is a euphemism for patent troll. When I heard about the lawsuits, I recalled that old Lexus advertisement, and I did a quick search for other prior art. Guess what I found? A car called the Tucker 48 had a third headlight that swiveled as the steering wheel turned in 1948. Automakers today are actually spending money defending themselves from recent patent claims about technology invented more than a half century ago. My moment, after almost hitting that deer, was a Eureka moment. And I think we've all had Eureka moments in our lives. We just haven't had the big one yet. We're like gambling addicts, convinced by our small wins that we'll someday have the big score. And I think that may be one of the reasons that we want to believe the Eureka myth. But the big score, the big Eureka, is a myth. The Eureka that is a big idea, not a small one. It's something that doesn't happen in real life. It's a story we concoct when we tell the tales of past inventions. Small Eurekas do happen in real life, and they occur to many different people at roughly the same time. Eurekas can be wonderful experiences and can lead to great things, but don't be fooled into thinking that a Eureka is unique. Society will not be deprived of an invention just because one person didn't follow up on a moment of inspiration. The better the idea is, the more likely it is that someone else will have, or already has had, the same idea. When I tell people that I support abolishing patents, I get some strange looks. Evidently, this is considered a radical notion, but it seems pretty obvious to me. Even if I can convince someone that ideally we would be better off without patents, my listener typically suggests that an abrupt transition would be too difficult, that there would be unintended consequences. It's the same argument that many people make when opposing marijuana legalization. I live in Colorado, in the United States. It's one of the states leading the way toward marijuana legalization in the United States. Let me tell you about unintended consequences. Tourism is up. Tax revenue is up. Teen marijuana use is down and below the national average. Admittedly, there have been some negative consequences. I've heard that we're having a problem with unemployment among prison guards. Sometimes what seems to be a negative consequence to an individual is, in fact, a great benefit to society as a whole. Now, I haven't been able to confirm the prison guard unemployment rumor, but what I have found out is that prison guards are among the major opponents of marijuana legalization. Do you know who else opposes legalization? Pharmaceutical companies. Apparently, they're more concerned about the sales of their patented drugs than they are about sick people feeling better. When the Nobel Prize is handed out, it is increasingly given to more than one person. I've heard some folks say that this is due to the fact that science has progressed to the point at which no single person is able to make major achievements. There just isn't any low-hanging fruit out there anymore, supposedly. In certain areas of research, it is true that groups are required. But in general, I think it is nonsense that individuals are less able to contribute to science than they were in the past. History is jam-packed with people claiming that all the discoveries have already been made, and they're always wrong. Sometimes multiple Nobels are given to independent discoverers of the same thing. It isn't uncommon at all. And it may be that modern communication technology makes it more apparent when multiple discovery occurs. Sometimes Nobels are given to a team of collaborators. If scientists are collaborating more than they used to, I think that's great. But it's probably a sign that modern technology has made collaboration easier, not that collaboration is more necessary than it was in the past. Another possible reason for the increase in multiple Nobel winners is that collaborators may be more likely to be acknowledged than they were in the past. Have you ever heard of Rosalind Franklin? Perhaps not, but I bet many of you have heard of Watson and Crick, who won the Nobel Prize for their work on DNA that was based on her data. I have mixed feelings about the Nobel Prize. I think it is a great honor to those who advance science, but the prize seems to perpetuate the mythology of invention, especially by having a policy that a prize cannot be given to more than 3 people. It is a disservice to humanity to insist that the most important scientific contributions cannot come from groups of 4 or more people. The folks who somehow produce idea after idea are my favorite people, not for the value of any one idea, but for their spirit of inventiveness. Most of them will never be considered for a Nobel Prize. There are probably Nobel Prize winners or future Nobel Prize winners in this room, perhaps. Now, would you like to be among them? There's one way to be absolutely certain that you will not, and that is to refrain from publishing your ideas. Hold your best idea in your head. Keep it secret. Don't let anyone know about the precious gem you've stored there, except it's not precious. Your idea has no value until you do something with it or tell someone about it. Part of the Eureka Myth is that you only need the right idea to make $1 million. It could even be something simple, like a pet rock or the bread climp. The truth is that implementation matters. No investor in the world is going to fund your startup based on an idea alone? How are you developing your idea? Who are your customers? How have you proven that you are capable of delivering something your customers want? And what makes you more likely to succeed than your competition? An idea is a seed, but seeds are all over the place. Successful businesses are seeds that have been planted in fertile soil and have found the right amount of water and sun over a long period of time. It takes work to turn an idea into a product, and it takes even more work to deliver that product to satisfied customers. Thomas Edison famously said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. But somehow, despite that quotation, my childhood image of Edison was more Doc Brown than Elon Musk. But I've heard Edison called recently the Elon Musk of his day. Jessica Silby, the author of the Eureka Myth, wrote that when they describe how and why their company succeeds, it is not largely or solely because of intellectual property. It is because of loyalty, relationships, reputation, a copacetic workplace, the excellence of their products and services, first mover advantage, private agreements, an attentive and understandable market, and a constantly evolving offering of complementary products and services built around identifiable marketplace needs or desires. My company makes open source hardware tools for the information security community. Now, something I did not anticipate when I started my business is how difficult it would be to explain to people what I do. The elevator pitch for Great Scott Gadgets requires an unusually slow elevator. First, I have to convince people that hacking is a worthwhile endeavor. Then I have to explain open source hardware. It turns out that this is the significantly higher hurdle. When I started making hardware, it seemed perfectly natural to me that my hardware should be open source. I spent many years in IT, starting long before it was called IT, and without exception, every single thing I did in my career that I was proud of was something that I accomplished with the help of open source software. I wanted to give back to the community that had given me so much. For me, making everything I produce open source, software or hardware or whatever, isn't an option. It's simply the right thing to do. Elevator people often ask if I have patents. I ask them if they'd like me to join me on a longer elevator. Usually, though, I avoid the subject of patent abolition and the ethics of open source. Instead, I tell them how ineffective patents are, especially for small companies. Every successful product gets cloned these days, patented or not, open source or not. By making my products open source, I disseminate my inventions as widely as I can. I give my ideas the greatest possible chance of having a positive effect on the world. And everyone who hears about me and one of my ideas is a potential customer, even if they were exposed to my creation through a clone. Sure, you can buy a HarkRF or any number of other HackRF clones from China, but if you hear about HackRF and search for it online, you'll find my company as the first search result. The marketing angle has the elevator people half convinced by the end of the ride. And I think the reason they're only half convinced is because they can't let go of that old myth. They think that great ideas have great value, and that by giving away my ideas, I'm losing value. When I'm away from home, I enjoy traveling with a toy guitar to entertain myself. Now let's say you were to sit down with me and try out my guitar. You like it, so you steal it from me. I would be sad because I wouldn't have my guitar anymore. I would be deprived of my ability to play it. But let's say you sat down with me to try my guitar and did not steal it. Instead, you leave having learned a song that I wrote. I would still have my guitar, and I would still have my song. I would be deprived of nothing. I reject the notion that scarcity increases the value of ideas. The opposite is in fact true. Ideas have value in proportion to how much they are shared. If I ever decide to stop selling open source hardware and instead pursue a career in music, the popularity of my songs would be directly related to my ability to sell tickets to performances. This is exactly what the elevator people don't understand. Ideas have value in proportion to how much they are shared. Your ideas are worthless until you share them with the world. This notion is hardly anything new. Don Lancaster wrote in his Hardware Hacker column in 1988, "I would like to be able to report to you that ideas are still worth a dime a bale in 10-bale lots. It is only when an idea is both converted into a form that people can use and in fact are actually and aggressively using it that the idea gains any value." In the following issue, he wrote, "I am sorry if I did offend one or two patent attorneys and one or two others who seem to be profiting from this very sorry state of affairs. I also extend my apologies to their BMW dealers." In the debate between soft science and hard science, the experimental physicists I spoke with a couple weeks ago seem to have the advantage. Hackers do science too, but it is a mixture of both hard and soft. We study computing systems, creations not of nature but of humans. Much of what interests us is how humans use computers and how there are strengths and weaknesses in whole systems that include both technological and human elements. A growing segment of the information security community, however, studies harder aspects of computing technology. For example, in recent years, there have been great advances in formal verification of computer programs. It is now possible to mathematically prove the correctness of many programs. Researchers in the LangSec movement are taking a language theoretic approach to computer security. They look at information systems and see interfaces between various components. An interface could, for example, be a user interface that accepts input directly from a human, or it could be a network interface that accepts input from another computer, or it could be an application programming interface that accepts input from some other code running on the same computer, even if linked into the same process that is handling the input. Anywhere input is processed, LangSec researchers point out that the input can be thought of as a language, and that the language's complexity can be classified according to a hierarchy that has existed for decades in the field of linguistics. More complex languages require more complex input processing, and it has been shown that only the simplest languages can be processed with computer programs that can be proven to terminate on all possible inputs. The halting problem, known since the early years of computer science, tells us that more complex languages require input processing that may never end. If you can't prove that your program terminates on all possible inputs, you cannot possibly prove that it correctly processes all possible inputs. The security of every computing system, therefore, depends on simplicity of input languages. The astonishing result of this work is that by simply combining decades-old linguistics research with decades-old computer science research, we can see that most modern information systems have no hope of ever providing any security guarantees. If you want security guarantees, you must, at a minimum, specify input languages throughout your system that do not exceed a certain threshold of complexity. It may seem strange that the application of linguistics, the study of natural languages of humans, to computer science, the study of machines created by humans, yields a hard result regarding the provable correctness of computer programs. Now, I'm frequently astonished by this myself, but it is a result that I cannot refute. So I encourage everyone who creates information systems to pay attention and to define protocols and interfaces with a grammatical simplicity that will allow future security guarantees. The information security community includes both hackers and academic researchers. And the reason that I mention the LangSec movement is because, to me, it's the most exciting research happening in the field. And because it was started by a small number of people at the intersection of those two groups, hackers and academics. I don't believe that this was an accident. I believe that there are some things that hackers do well, and that there are other things academics do well. We have much to learn from one another. Hackers are good at finding one provable aspect of a system with many unprovable characteristics. When presented with a security claim, hackers like to show how the claim is false. You say your system's unbreakable? Well, here's one way it's already broken. There's a saying in the hacker community: you can't argue with a root shell. This means that when someone points out how your system is broken, it is an irrefutable proof. Sergey Bratis, one of the key members of the LangSec community, has pointed out that an exploit is a proof by construction of the vulnerability of a system. Hackers are terrible at writing things down. We enjoy sharing information, but we often share our most important results in presentations and conferences without any written paper. And when we do write things down, it is often in a blog post or an informal publication like FRAC or the International Journal of Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out. Now, these are wonderful publications, but they lack the rigorous peer review of academic journals. I am often bewildered by the fact that much of the most important knowledge in the hacker community is perpetuated in an oral tradition. Hackers are not always good at citing past research. In the information security community, hackers often cite other hackers, and academics often cite other academics. But neither group is very good at citing research from the other group. Hackers are good at open source. And this is perhaps the most important thing that academics can learn from hackers, in my opinion. Hackers created the infrastructure of the internet out of open source software and open documentation. And they have called the internet home for as long as the internet has existed. Open source software and now hardware is a tremendously important part of hacker culture. When we share deliberately. And we do everything in our power to ensure that others can take advantage of all the work that we share. One thing we do not do is publish findings behind paywalls. When I was invited to speak at the physics conference, one of the first things I did was to look for papers from the previous conference in 2015. Even though I did not find the full text in any central repository, I was pleased to be able to find every paper I looked for, complete with a Creative Commons attribution license available on the web. I was delighted to find this because somehow in 2017, this still is not the norm. Sadly, there are many notable journals that do not provide open access to scientific research. And in my opinion, there's no excuse for this in the 21st century. The most important thing you can do to advance science is to disseminate your findings as widely as you can. In this century, that means that you must make your work freely available online. If you are publishing research in 2017 behind a paywall, I'm not sure what you're doing, but you are not doing science. Another important and often overlooked aspect of science is the repeatability of experiments. If you publish your results but hide your data, if you don't share software that is central to your research, if you don't describe your equipment in sufficient detail for someone to reproduce your experimental apparatus, you aren't doing science. Now, these words may sound harsh, but I hope you'll give them some thought. We live in a world today in which the value of science is disputed. There are political voices growing louder every day, telling people that science is a system of beliefs, not a mechanism for finding truth. Even well-educated people who think they have an appreciation for science are not immune to pseudoscience crazes. Just look at labels in any grocery store in the United States to see what I'm talking about. There is one great thing you can do to demonstrate the value of science, and that is to do the best science you can. Share your results as widely as you can. Share all the information necessary to reproduce your results. Convince your audience how you have avoided fooling yourself into believing a false conclusion. Share all your evidence. If you don't, you will plant the seeds of doubt that undermine confidence in science itself. Now, some of you may think that this advice doesn't apply to you because you don't think that what you do is science. But hackers do science all the time. Every time you find a new type of bug or a new technique, every time you learn something that other people haven't figured out yet, every time you share this knowledge with your peers, you are doing science. In fact, if you share as effectively as you can, you may be doing a better job of science than many of the people who call themselves scientists. I recently reread Cargo Cult Science, the famous 1974 lecture by Richard Feynman. And in this wonderful lecture, Feynman explored the difference between science and pseudoscience and pointed out that a lot of people who think they are doing science actually aren't. He encouraged scientists to do a better job of sharing their research and making their experiments more repeatable, making the excellent point that honest and thorough publication is essential to scientific integrity. Lack of this integrity is nothing new. Feynman discussed bad science done throughout the 20th century. In the 21st century, however, we have an opportunity to establish better standards for science. It is an opportunity created by the internet, which has enabled better sharing of information. The opportunity is also created by open source culture that has shown the value of licensing, not just publishing information. Our new standards for science should combine the best of hacker culture with the best of traditional science. Every contribution you make, every paper you write, every line of code you publish, every hardware design you place under an open source license serves to advance science. If there is one thing that should be apparent to everyone here at this conference, it is that you are a part of something greater than yourself. The achievements of this community are made by the combined efforts of many people. The progress of science and technology is made in small steps, not giant leaps. So remember that your contributions, no matter how small, are important. Remember that they will have the greatest impact if you describe them as thoroughly and honestly as you can, and do your best to disseminate the information as widely as possible. Your ideas are worthless until you share them with the world. So share them in every way you can. Thank you. Okay. I wasn't planning to take questions after this talk. But hey, if there are questions, I'd love to hear them. No? Someone? We have a free book to give away to somebody who asks a good question. Will I share my text? That is an excellent question. Thank you, Matthias. You win a book. I will share the text of this talk very soon. I was refining it yesterday, so it's not 100% publishable right now, but it's very, very close, and I will do that. Thank you. Any other questions? No? That's good because we don't have any more books. Okay. Thank you all.